Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook. We're January 19th, and gosh, Arpin, you were in Ottawa yesterday. I'm going to be in Boston for Saturday's game. I'm curious to see if the Canadiens are going to be able to showcase a better defensive effort than what we've seen yesterday in Ottawa. But this is really a case of a team that's Jekyll and Hyde, that's able to contain, at least, maybe not surpass or dominate, but at least contain like the best offenses in the league. And, you know, whether it's against San Jose or yesterday against Ottawa, they struggled mightily. So it's really a 500 team.
It is big time. You know, I looked at it. They haven't been more than 3 games above 500 all season, and they have not been more than 2 games below 500 all season. That's their range. They've been in that range all season. And, you know, the thing about that game in Ottawa, you know, Mike Kelly at NHL Network put out a stat on Friday morning where the Senators had 16 scoring chances off the rush. 14 of them were on net, which was the most by any team in any game this season. So, you know, rush defense is one of the things Martin St. Louis keeps harping on. Yeah. And it's one of these recurring things, you know, on a young team. And I think this is, you know, a lesson that they learned the hard way last season, is that, you know, these areas of their game, they don't necessarily get taken care of, and you can kind of put them aside and move on to the next thing. There's certain elements of their game that they constantly have to stay on top of. But, you know, it wasn't just last night. I think we were looking at even some of the better games that they've played, and, you know, expected goals numbers and shot numbers and all sorts of things suggest that the defense is getting a little leaky. And so we'll see what happens in Boston. If you remember, the last time they were in Boston was really a season-altering night. You know, it really impacted the psyche of this team a great deal because they were given a lesson by that Bruins team. You know, let's see if it seems like they might be in a position for that to happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. And regarding the rush defense, it's interesting because Kent Hughes also mentioned it in his midseason press conference, you know, pointing to that aspect of the game where they've been struggling and they've been trying to work on it a great deal. And it's really a case where you can see instances where the forwards, especially the third guy, will be caught too deep. So they'll give a lot of space in the neutral zone on the counterattack. And then if the defense start just giving up the blue line and pull back, it gives so much room for the opposing team to gain speed and structure and attack. And in odd man rushes, they're putting themselves in danger. And I mean, Kaiden Primo was not in the type of form where he would steal a game yesterday and clean up all those mistakes. But sometimes the Canadiens will fall back into their patterns, and probably you need games like that to remind yourself that, hey, what we had tried to fix, it needs revisiting again, because it's like at school, you learn the lesson, but then you need revision at some point. And it was a revision game for that defense last night.
I would imagine that Martin St. Louis is spent the day Friday cursing the fact that they have to decide on days off well in advance because the Canadiens got a day off today in Boston. In the middle of 3 games in 4 nights, it makes perfect sense. But I'm sure Martin would have liked to have at least had some meetings because, there's nothing better than the only positive of a game like they had in Ottawa is the teaching potential of it. And there was a lot of teaching potential from that game. You mentioned the odd man rushes. I mean, that second period, it was one after the other. And frankly, the Senators could have had a bunch more goals, that they just didn't cash in on. And so, but again, I think that was an extreme case of something that the Canadiens were sort of teetering towards. I don't think, considering the quality of opponents they'd been facing, I know the numbers suggest that defensively it's been difficult, but when you're facing the Oilers, the Avalanche, the Rangers before that, and just high quality opponents,
Yeah.
that's going to happen, And so again, let's see if a trend develops off of this rush defense lapse that they had in Ottawa, and it was a big lapse. Like let's not sugarcoat it. It was awful. But I think that's something that Martin has kind of taken to like about this team, is that they do correct themselves quickly, generally speaking. Let's see if they're able to do that against pretty high quality opponent again on Saturday.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, they facing the Rangers, the Oilers, the Avalanche, those are high quality teams, but they also gave up 38 shots against Buffalo. They gave up 39 against Philadelphia, 38 last night against Ottawa. Those last 8 games, they gave up on average 38 shots. And during that span, of 8 games, their expected goals ratio was one of the worst in the league. They're at 44.77%. So it's not a team. I mean, they might be 500 in terms of points accumulated and in the standings, but they're far from being a 50% expected goal type of team. So especially lately. So whether you're looking at chances, shots, goals, they're all in the red, and that's something that. It's going to be Martin St. Louis keeps saying how they defend in 5. It'll be a responsibility of the forwards to fix it, but we'll see also how the blue line will rebound. And today I wanted to I wanted to focus a little bit with you on some of those defensemen. I think it was unmistakable the last few weeks. That we had to praise and mention how Jayden Struble had, climbed the ladder this season and ended up playing on the 4th on the top 4. He has for the past little while, but it seems like it's been catching up to him a little bit, right? Since he's been put on that in that top 4 position.
Yeah, and playing with David Savard, playing against tougher opponents, and this is something that has come up regularly this season, where Martin St. Louis is looking for a 4th guy to put in that top 4, whether that's Gustav Lindstrom for a while, whether it was Jonathan Kovacevic for the span he played with Mike Matheson, Harris for a little bit, Barron, and now Struble. Like it just shows the extent to which context in performance is important, Jayden Struble at the start was getting sheltered minutes, limited minutes, was making the most of those minutes, and through his play demanding more and more and more. Very similar to what Jonathan Kovacevic was doing when he got bumped up to the top pair with Mike Matheson for a stretch. But Martin St. Louis has said in the past that he feels players have windows of efficiency, like ice time windows where they're at their most efficient. And there's also usage windows, I guess. They're not really windows, but usage circumstances that lead to certain efficiencies for certain players. I think past few games we've seen it with Jayden Struble. What used to be a very mistake-free, efficient, simple, even though I hate that word, but a simple game, not making mistakes, not making any flashy plays, just moving the puck, getting it back when needed, doing what needs to be done. Of late, with his increased role, you're starting to see more mistakes just because he has more opportunities to make them, and just because he's playing against better players. And it doesn't mean that Jayden Struble's all of a sudden a bad defenseman. It's just that it's a tricky transition with young defensemen to get them into that threshold of top 4 usage. And it's something that the Canadians are going to have to figure out a way to do on a regular basis, because there's more of these young defensemen coming, and this is going to be something that the Canadians are going to have to monitor. The only young defenseman who really didn't have much of an issue with it was Kaiden Guhle last season, where I think he's just seamlessly kind of, without anyone really noticing, worked his way into a top 4 role and didn't really look out of place. But we've seen a number of guys this season. I think we're going to see a number of guys in the future where, yeah, he looks so good on a third pairing role. Let's give him more. Well, it's not always that simple. There are some circumstances that make a defenseman look good in a third pairing role that can maybe expose that same defenseman in a higher role.
And it's the same with, Marty was talking about, I remember he was talking about forwards on that day, but it's the same principle that applies for defensemen. He said, if I give you 10 minutes, show me that I can give you 12. And if I give you 12, show me that I can give you 14, etc. So that eventually your usage is going to, your time on ice will go up, because that optimal time, you need to have a certain amount of data and understanding of what the player can give you before you narrow down that window. For players that arrive, in order to find it, you first have to give them a certain amount of leash. Some have had it easier than others. But yeah, so I think your examples from earlier, especially Kovacevic and Barron, who have been thrusted into those top 4 roles for specific periods, at some point they peaked. And actually Kovacevic fell off a cliff, and his game has not recovered to this day from that. He was scratched. He's been brought back for a couple of games, made some turnovers, been scratched again. It's not easy for him. So, but I wonder, I think that it's great that they make that same experiment with Struble. But when you talk about a young defense core, that's also part of it, because you have a lot of players that are ready to see some NHL action, that are ready to take some responsibility. But that jump from the third pairing to the second, if you take Struble out, are there guys that are ready to take on that role now? Probably not. I would rather keep Barron in the third pairing responsibility. Same goes for Harris, Kovacevic, Struble, all those guys. So will they work at a rotation? Would they call up Jacky and say, well, we'll put you as part of the mix too? I don't know, but there's just a tipping point that you reach with each of those players. And I feel like with Struble, we've seen it in the past 3-4 games.
Yeah, no, 100%. And look, I mean, Harris looks really good right now, right? Mm-hmm. Playing third pair.
Yeah.
So it's just important context to keep in mind. And so the one role, I guess, that's shifted quite nicely for the Canadiens has been Guhly moving to the right side. And I feel we should talk about this, because the Struble thing to me is a wider ranging story where, the D is going to be young and they're going to be coming into the NHL. And, it's
part of the progression year.
It'll be a recurring thing that you need to look out for. I feel that we should sort of monitor as we go along. So when you see Guhly, who, let's be honest, when he was playing with Barron, yes, Barron was struggling, but I think Guhly also was going through a stretch where he was struggling as well. I don't know about you, but I find since he's been put on the right side with Matheson, he's looked really good. Like he's gotten back to himself, and that Guhly's ability to play on the right side would have wide-ranging implications for how the Canadiens organize their defense moving forward. So let's dig into some of those. Let's say this becomes a thing where Guhly can effectively become a right side defenseman. Mm-hmm. What are the domino effects of that as you see them?
Gosh, there are so many. First, I think it's wonderful news. I don't think that Martin St. Louis doesn't seem to be too enamored with the idea of having a guy playing his offside on defense. As much as possible, he'd like to play a lefty with a righty. But let's say he sticks with that. Just in terms of personnel, it has a lot of dominoes that could potentially fall because of that. The first one I see is that I think that Justin Barron could and should become trade bait for the Canadiens. I think that he's a guy that has not he's not a guy that coming. No, I'll tell you why. Well, I feel like he's a guy who could be a good defenseman in the league, but I'm just concerned with just the level of trust that they're going to give him and the progression curve that they see in the defensive play. If they are to have so many defensemen and choose from those defensemen, they have to identify for certain guys, and Barron is one of them. At what point do we have like the ideal value for this guy? And if we hold on to him too long, we continue to experiment and wait for 2-3 years, etc., and then we realize that he's got value X, it might not be the value that he would still have at this point in his career. So he seems to me like a guy that if you could have enough depth on the right side, he could become expendable.
Well, if you look down the road, just sorry to interrupt, but I mean, to put that in context, right? Like 2-3 years from now, it wouldn't be so hard if Guhly's playing on the right side to look at a right side of Guhly, Reinbacher, Logan Mailloux.
Sure.
And then where's Justin Barron?
Exactly. But that happens, he becomes I mean, you don't want to, that's the other domino, is that you don't want to pressure guys into roles that they're not ready for. And Logan Mailloux could benefit from a lot of seasoning still, even if he's had a promising season so far in Laval. You could leave him there, work on his defensive game, so that even though they have needs on the right side, you wouldn't put him in that position where it's too much too quick. Same goes for David Reinbacher. We'll see how he fares in North America at the end of the year, if, as we expect, he comes to play here. But I think that Guhly enables you to bring some stability to the right side and enables you on the left side to potentially have Struble and Xhekaj playing at the same time, which would bring, I feel, a very rugged and solid and hard to play against type of defense. So that attracts me. And eventually, if you were talking about looking down the road, you add Lane Hutson to that group, it could be just one of Xhekaj or Struble, but he would be well surrounded. So I think that Guhly, even though he's a lefty and he's going to be a mainstay for this team, I see that just looking at what they've got on the left and the right side, it's more interesting for the team as a whole to have it on the right side.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I got to admit, I tend to lean towards, Marty's way of seeing it. And I think most coaches' way of seeing it, that, having a lefty-righty combination is ideal. And it's not, and the Canadians have reinforcements coming on the right side. And if they held on to Barron, having a right side of Reinbacher, Mailloux, Barron, 2 or 3 years down the road would be good. But it does, Guhly moving to the right side would eliminate some of the logjam on the left side. Because even now, if you're looking at, you mentioned the down the road, like if you have a defense of Hutson and then Guhly, Xhekaj, Struble, Mailloux, Reinbacher, that's like a big, mobile, aggressive, mean, streaky kind of defense, And so it compensates for, Lane Hutson's not that, obviously. He's a lot of other things, but that's not what he is. So it would, allow you to introduce a player like Lane, and we're not even including Mike Matheson in there. And then, he has a couple of years left on his deal. They might even want to re-sign him at some point. Like it's also important to note in this whole equation that you can't just roll out a bunch of kids on defense. It just doesn't work, So, and that's, I think, another thing that people need to realize. But I mean, it's true that putting Guhly on the right would maybe make Barron expendable. To me, in the immediate future, Guhly going on the right, does it make David Savard expendable, or does it make David Savard someone that you try to float? We've talked about the extent to which teams are looking for defensemen like that. Chris Tanev is one of the hottest names on the market, obviously an expiring contract, not quite the same thing. But those types of defensemen, year after year at the trade deadline, playoff type, battle hardened, shot blocking, snot-nosed defensemen kind of are very valuable. And maybe the fact that Savard has another year on his deal, so you get him for 2 playoff runs, makes him more valuable. But you have to weigh that against what I just said. You can't just roll out a whole bunch of kids on defense. You need a veteran presence. If you trade Savard, you're basically saying, well, Guhly's a veteran now, whereas he's played like 80 games in the NHL, not even. So, but yeah, it's, you know, it does create a whole bunch of possibilities that don't exist if Guhly's on the left side. I agree with that for sure.
Yeah, but I think that idea of just not leaving a bunch of young defensemen out there and making sure that you've got enough veterans to protect them is the main reason why I don't expect Savard to be traded this offseason, prior to this trade deadline. Next year, at the same time, might be a different matter. But the only thing that I wonder, though, is that if there's a scarcity of right-handed defensemen available, and the price for those, you can potentially fetch a lot, can the Canadiens take advantage of that and jump on the occasion? And, you know, if they're being offered something that they can't refuse, they decide to move Savard now instead of next year. Because I look at the lineups, could they afford to be without David Savard and have Guhly and Barron and Kovacevic on the right side? You would have to be so out of contention by trade deadline, and you know,
which they will be.
You wave the white flag and say, you know what, let's screw. Too bad. Let's just screw that.
Well, that's exactly what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
At the trade deadline, they will be so far out of contention that you know, the consequences on the standings will not be a factor in any decisions they make trade deadline wise. And Kent Hughes even said it. I mean, it's, you know, he said it on Monday. Like, the plan's not going to change. So whether the Canadiens are in it, whether the Canadiens are out of it, they're going to proceed with their eye on the future. So if now let's see, like, you know, I think Pierre LeBrun had kind of an interesting point in his latest column on The Athletic, where he kind of talked about how the parity has made it so bubble teams feel like they can sneak in, and top teams are less sure about their contender status. So,
yeah, you know, ask the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Ask the Toronto Maple Leafs, exactly. But there's a bunch of, you know, I think every contending team, Stanley Cup contending team, you could point at a flaw or two or three that would make them think twice about going all in on the season, you know, like dumping first round picks left and right and adding, so that maybe it's a more conservative trade deadline because of that parity, which could depress the value of any number of guys the Canadiens are trying to trade. Sean Monahan, Jake Allen, if they were to go down that path, David Savard, or whoever. And to me, if you only trade David Savard if you get a king's ransom for him, like if you get a big haul, then you have to strongly consider it. Even then, it's a discussion. I would do it, but I would understand them not doing it to insulate their young defensemen. But if you're not getting the big haul, then of course you don't do that. Regardless of what it. Well, just, you know, when you were saying, oh, can you roll with whoever
Guhly, Barron, Kovacevic.
Yeah, Guhly, Barron, Kovacevic. Sure, you can. I mean, what are they hurting by doing that? You know, yeah, they'll probably lose a few more games. Ultimately, that could help them. You know, I mean, if they wind up with a better draft pick, but you know, it's one thing to do it for the whole season, where you're putting young defensemen or young players in general in a tough spot. It's another thing to do it like from the deadline to the end of the season, like basically 3 weeks, 4 weeks. You know, it's like, it's not, and they're gonna, you know, once
Savard is gone, once Savard is gone, he's not coming back in the summer. So you would have that next season too.
Yeah, but you could address it. You could sign a veteran for your third pair or whatever. I mean, it's not as if it's not a fixable you can't find a temporary fix for that. It's, you know, so, but again, depends on the return. So we'll
It's
see.
funny because
I would agree with you that they would be less inclined to do it now. Like someone's going to have to come and really knock their socks off. But you mentioned the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like the Toronto Maple Leafs would be one of those teams who would need a guy like David Savard.
Yeah.
But they're playing in such a way right now that if you're Brad Treliving or Brendan Shanahan, are we spending more assets on these guys? Like the way they're playing? Like we have a lot of questions that we need to answer about our team, and they could look in the mirror too and say, wow, we didn't really have a very good offseason. We didn't help these guys too much, but still the holes that need fixing are off-season holes that need to be fixed. And so that's, and how many other teams are in a position like that where they're questioning that, I mean, I saw, Jared Spurgeon's gone for the year, and I mean, Bill Guerin is just is so all in on this group and just refuses to give up for some reason. Apparently he's going to look to add someone to replace Jared Spurgeon. Now, Jared Spurgeon is a different player than David Savard, but it's just an example where, the whims of a general manager can change with every loss and every win and what have you. And so the market really has to shape up, I think, for the Canadians to really consider it.
Right now on the right side in Minnesota, you got Brock Faber, rookie defenseman, top pairing on the right side, then Zach Bogosian, then Dakota Mermis. So, yeah, David Savard could help them. There's no doubt about it.
Exactly. But how much are they willing to give? That's the thing, is that it's all well and good to not wave the white flag on your season, but at some point, someone has to tell Bill Guerin, hey, Bill, let's take it easy. We're not that good. We're not that good, right? You've already fired a coach. This is spending more on this team is insanity. So if he comes to his senses, you're probably not going to get the price that you want for someone like David Savard. But if you get it, I think you absolutely 100% have to consider it.
There used to be a time not long ago where guys who had one more year remaining on their contract, it seemed like they were more valuable because you could use them for 2 playoff runs instead of one. I haven't heard that argument lately, though. It seems that extra year, and Savard, as we all know, has another year to his contract, is more of a deterrent because it's the financial. Everybody's so tight against the cap, and even if you count for the fact that the cap is going up, let's say in Toronto, they already spent on Nylander the margin by which the cap is going to go up. So they're not going to be more flexible. It's just they could maintain the status quo for next season by re-signing Nylander, but the cap for them, they're still going to get squeezed. So for a team like Montreal who wants to trade,
for most teams, that's not the case, though.
Yeah, but I wonder if the fact that either for Savard or for Jake Allen, for that matter, the extra year, it would be probably easier to trade Allen to a team that's that needs help in goal just for this season if he didn't have that other year. I'm sure that the teams that have commitment to other goalies for 2-3 more seasons, they don't want to add an expensive backup who signed for another year.
Yeah, but I think the reason why we haven't heard that is because, this is the first year that teams could actually consider doing that. I think is it's been for so long they couldn't add the guy with the extra year in his contract because the cap was not going up. They had commitments, what have you. With the cap going up and continuing to go up, but in both these cases, it's only next year that matters. Basically, the cap increase would fully absorb either Allen's or Savard's contract, plus, and leaving a little bit more cushion. So, but I think what's different is that it used to be that extra year got you more value in a trade. This is where I think you're correct in that now that extra year might actually cost you value in a trade, or won't get you more more of the value that you should, because you're sending a player that's under team control for, the end of one season, a playoff, and a whole other season and a whole other playoff. That is where I think you might be correct in that the value of those players used to be higher, and maybe they're not anymore.
Yeah. So maybe so in that sense, perhaps it hurts Savard's value. And in that sense, it would make more sense for them to wait until the trade deadline next year to trade him. But he's healthy right now. We cannot guarantee that he's going to be healthy next year.
Not only that, we can't guarantee he'll be effective next year.
Yeah.
He's effective right now. And it's actually, we were talking about Struble. Well, Struble's game started to dip when he got paired with Savard. And I don't Savard has his limitations as a player. We all know that. He's at his most valuable in the playoffs, right? I mean, that's where he's good, and I think most general managers know that about him. But you risk getting into a situation if you wait till next deadline. If he has a difficult regular season next year and just destroys his value, that's the risk you have to take. That's it seems to be the tightrope Kent Hughes always has to. He has to do that with Sean Monahan every year. Where he's had to. He did it like Ben Sherratt. It was a similar situation, and he pulled the trigger on that deal early as a result. Obviously got the price he wanted to. That didn't hurt. But that's going to be an interesting conversation in that room. Is Savard's value as a leader and a mentor and a veteran, someone who can eat difficult minutes, someone who can kill penalties, someone who blocks shots, does all those great things, how that can help their young defense core, versus what he can fetch in a trade now versus what he can fetch in a trade at the deadline next year. Because it's pretty clear, like, at the end of next season, he's not going to be playing for the Canadiens anymore. Like, one way or the other, he will not. So when do you get the most value for that player? And to me, taking into account the risk of his game slipping next year, I think that is March 8th.
Right. So moving on from one Quebec player to another, let's go up front and talk about Joshua Roy, who had his first taste of the NHL, first goal in the NHL against the New Jersey Devils.
Beauty.
Oh, beauty. Yeah, for sure. I mean, all night long against New Jersey, he was a threat out there with Armia and Monahan. First couple of games at the Bell Center, more tentative. I think. Well, he faced two teams that play extremely fast. So for a guy just arriving from the American League, the difference in speed. I mean, at some point there was in his very first game, it was like a second or third shift. Somebody lobbed the puck in the neutral zone, and he tried to land it with his hand so that he could carry the puck afterwards. But the second the puck touched the ice, Brett Kulak cut in and stole the puck, and he was like, "Whoa!" It was not Connor McDavid. It was Brett Kulak.
Yes,
exactly. Everything happens fast in this league. Everybody comes at you, and you don't have room, you don't have time. So he learned that the hard way in those first two games, but he got his level of comfort raised quickly and significantly from his second to his third game. So what do you make of his beginnings?
Well, steak dinner in Manhattan with the Quebec boys, that'll make you comfortable.
Yeah, you sure?
Yeah. So that helps. I think I mentioned this on the broadcast in Ottawa last night, but I was listening to a lot of the post game stuff. I was in the car and I was just consuming some media after the game against the game in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And, I think we've seen it enough times where the public, and to some extent, certain pockets of the media, get very excited about a local kid, get very excited. And it's obviously more the case in Montreal than it is anywhere else. So if you have a local Francophone kid who comes up and starts showing signs that he's ready, the instinct is to say he's ready and say it's time.
Yeah.
We've seen it countless numbers of times. I think it would be important for the Canadians to stick to their plan here and, give Joshua Roy the taste of the NHL and try to make it a good taste. Like if he plays another couple of good games, Josh Anderson comes back or Tanner Pearson comes back, who we fear he seems to be on the verge of doing, send him back. Say, you know what? You did great. You showed what you'll be able to do in this league at some point. But we want you to go and finish your season in the AHL. Let's help that team get into the playoffs. Go play in the playoffs in the American Hockey League and go have success there. And we'll be waiting for you. You're a big part of our future. We're not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. There's no need to rush this. So, obviously, I don't think you can judge anyone off the game in Ottawa. Everyone had a pretty rough go of it. But I think the Canadiens organization has to be kind of leery of this phenomenon that risks growing in magnitude, let's say, if he strings together a couple more good games. Because just one good game from him, I think, created some of that momentum towards something like that.
But the issue here is that against Ottawa, even though the whole team sucked, that line was the least bad of the lot. And if it's true.
They should win an award. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
So if they have a good game in Boston, you know how Marty thinks. He might say, I don't want to be focused too much on the result. But if he sees something that works, his first instinct won't be to dismantle it. He's going to try to keep intact whatever works. And right now, for what we've seen in a very small sample size, Roy, Monahan, Armia, it works. Armia plays. Armia managed to play like 4 or 5 very good games in a row. Kudos to him. Yeah. So if there's a bit of consistency in his game right now, which has been so elusive and so hard to get, maybe that Marty won't want to mess with that chemistry just yet. Because you mentioned 2 names of guys potentially coming back, Pearson and Anderson. To me, those are 2 very different cases. If Anderson comes back, then, yeah, sure, send him down because Anderson can play in that role, and you can send down Roy. But I haven't seen anything from Pearson that makes him like deserving of necessarily getting whatever spot there is there. I mean, he's going to play when he comes back.
I'll give you a reason. I'll give you a reason why he's deserving is because they want to get something for him at the trade deadline. That's why he's deserving. That would be the motivation.
That's not deserving. That's not deserving. That's asking the coach to manage the way that the general manager would want to manage.
It's part of the gig. It's the reality when you're not a playoff team. I mean, sometimes you have to play guys you don't want to play because you want to goose their value for the trade deadline. It happens all the time. It's a very there would be nothing wrong with telling Joshua Roy, you were really impressive. You really took a step. Mm-hmm. We have to do this for reasons that are outside of hockey reasons. We'd like you to go back to Laval. We'd like you to continue playing well and help that team make the playoffs. It's I think the Canadians and Ken Hughes said it on Monday. Like it's important to the organization that Laval managed to reach the playoffs. Mm-hmm. That's an important. I think it's more important than whatever benefit you get from keeping Joshua Roy around, and that might be good for him, even though arguably it wouldn't be. Like, I mean, let's say all of a sudden things go badly. He hits, the kind of the adrenaline of his call-up sort of wears off, and he hits a stretch where he's not as effective, and then you send him down after he's been playing poorly. That's a different vibe, going down because you've been playing poorly as opposed to going down just because of logistics. Just because this is what it is. It's a numbers game. You're the odd man out because of the numbers game, but you've been playing great. Go continue playing great in Laval. You go down there feeling good about yourself, and if you let it stretch out, and maybe, if you let it stretch out and he plays great, then great. But it's, I think it's a win sending him down after a few good games. You got your first NHL goal. He feels good about himself. maybe he can carry that into his play in Laval, and he can be even better in Laval. But for the organization, getting the Rocket into the playoffs is a priority. And so that would be part of the equation in this decision.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I'm sure that he'll end up in Laval at some point. But it's just the flip side argument of what you're saying, because they want to draw some value out of Pearson. The counter argument would be to say that with Roy and Armia, Sean Monahan has just played his 4 or 5 best games since game number 15.
Yeah.
So I think if you can raise the value of Monahan, you can hope to raise the value of Monahan more than you can hope to raise the value of Tanner Pearson.
But okay, so as it stands right now, I think we already discussed it, right? I mean, as it stands right now, Monahan's ceiling value is probably a second-round draft pick, right? Let's say.
If it's more, it's more, but that's what I would expect them to get. If it's more, great.
Well, exactly. So that's what it is right now. Mm-hmm. So how much more value are you going to get? Like, is Sean Monahan going to suddenly vault himself into first-round pick range? I don't think so. I doubt it. I just don't see that happening. Maybe it does. Who knows? But even if he goes on a heater with these guys, which, let's be honest, is not very likely. But let's say he does, because right now he has what? He got an assist last night. So he's got 4 assists in his last 3 games. Let's say he puts up, I don't know, 10 points in 10 games. Does he become a first round? Does the team say, "Oh, I'm giving up a first for this guy because he's producing with all of a sudden"? Like, I think teams know what Sean Monahan's all about. Any team acquiring Sean Monahan is probably going to slot him into their bottom 6. It's probably going to be a third-line center for any contending team that goes out and gets him.
Yeah,
it's pretty rare a team spends a first-round pick on a third-line center. Doesn't really happen too often. Unless it was who did Nashville gave up a first for Paul Gaustad. Remember Paul Gaustad got a first round pick? That was way back in the day, but yeah.
Yeah, so Andrew Kopp was traded for a first round pick, who ended up being Brad Lambert.
Right.
And a conditional second round pick. And a 5th.
Yeah? Jeez. Really?
Yeah. So
but did he play third line for them? I think he played on the wing, did he not? I could be wrong.
No, he was center, but he was moving from second to third. No. With New York, he played on the third line. Yeah, he played on the third line.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Pretty sure. But I mean, you say the whole league knows what Sean Monahan is all about. They know Sean Monahan, but there's an idea of Sean Monahan who was a premium player, and now there's will Sean Monahan ever find part of his magic back? And if he goes on a heater, there's a chance that a team might say, you know what, he's effective enough that he's worth paying more, because you create more of a market. If everybody says, too bad, he's a bottom 6 guy at this point, and he's labeled that way by everybody, then you won't fetch more than a second round pick. But if he shows more offense, people will remember that Sean Monahan has been a very productive player in the NHL before, and that he's not 30 years old.
He's not 30 years old, yes, but I mean, I think that I don't find that to be a good argument to keep Joshua Roy in the NHL. Sean Monahan's going well. I mean, you could replace, I mean, it's. You don't want to make development decisions based on that. Like it strikes me as just we talked about it the last episode. How the Canadians wanted to institute this sort of rotation where guys get a little taste, but then they go back to Laval, and that's they have a perfect chance to do it with this kid. So
for sure,
it's just and I think it's a good. I think it's going to be a good. I mean, I don't know how long he's going to stick around, but it would be a good experience for him to see what it's like to be a guy from here and play for the Canadians. It's also extra good to get a guy like that a taste of Montreal, because that's a unique reality that you have to handle that some people are really good at, like Salmon Tombeau, just doesn't bother him one bit. Doesn't change him or affect him or
No.
positively or negatively. He's got the perfect personality type for that.
Like Philip Dano before him.
Philip Dano before him, exactly. It's there's a lot of guys like that, and there's some guys who it's a little bit less.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Drouin,
for sure.
You know, I mean, Jonathan Drouin had trouble handling it. He thought he was ready for it, and he wasn't. And so it's. I think it's something that the Canadiens need to incorporate into their thinking of guys like this, guys from here that are going to feel added pressure naturally, that are going to get more media attention naturally, and how to digest it all.
But I know that you've heard some media talking about it and getting all excited by the local kid, but
which is normal. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
But in the grand scheme of things, honestly, there's been instances where people got carried away a lot more than that. I think that for the most part, people remain level-headed towards Joshua Roy because everybody expects him to go down, and they're not calling him the savior by any stretch. It's just it'd be fun if it works out.
The second intermission of the radio broadcast, I was going to pick up my daughter from water polo practice.
Mm-hmm.
The second intermission of the radio broadcast, they were debating that Joshua Roy brings more to the Canadiens than Jesse Ylönen, and there's no reason why Jesse Ylönen should play over Joshua Roy. This was in the middle of his first good game in the NHL. It hadn't even been completed yet. So
what have you done for me lately? And I mean, just now.
I'm just saying, it's just like, listen, it's fine. And the thing is that if he strings together a couple other good games, it's only going to grow. What was yesterday? The pregame in Ottawa was Sean Monahan and David Savard. They fielded like 8 questions. They were all about Joshua Roy. I mean, it's just a fact. It's like it's there's nothing wrong with it. It's normal for people to be excited about a guy from here who potentially has a bright future with the Canadiens. That's fine, but it's just it can be a lot for some people. I don't know if it will be for Joshua. Maybe he'll deal with it fine. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying that if he strings together another couple of good games, it tends to snowball this sort of thing. It gains momentum pretty quickly, and so the Canadiens just need to be aware of that, I think, and act accordingly. And whether they say, okay, well, screw it, let's expose him to it now. Maybe that'll be beneficial for him down the road. That I could see an argument being made in that sense, but it's just a factor that they have to consider with Joshua that they wouldn't have to with Sean Farrell.
Right.
As an example, or Emil Heinemann, or what have you. It's just an added layer to the management of this prospect as opposed to other ones. In my
Speaking of, so anyway, he's on emergency loan, so there's they would have to return him as soon as one of Pearson or Anderson's ready to come back. But you just mentioned Heinemann. Mm-hmm. Do you see a difference? Because Heinemann was eased into the lineup and really tiptoed, playing fourth line minutes. So on occasion, a game. I think he had a game on the third line. But Joshua Roy arrived and he had a spot on the second PP right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Why is that, you think? Because honestly, the fact that
I don't know.
In terms of usage, they pictured the two of them differently. Instead of managing Roy the same way that they would Heinemann. I mean, Roy, I understand that he's never been a fourth line guy, and to put him in the fourth line role would be a waste, which is one of the reasons why he'll go back to Laval eventually. But Heinemann, if you want to see what he's about, play him up. I
don't think he was given a proper window, and maybe he will after the deadline. Mm-hmm. I mean, if Monahan's gone, if somehow they manage to trade Pearson, who knows what else happens? But there's no. I mean, this is what's going to be tricky for the Canadiens is, there's no roster limit after the deadline, and so, but you do have only 3 call-ups that you can use between the deadline and the end of the season. So it's a tricky dance that you have to play. And plus you have to paper guys to be eligible for the AHL playoffs. Like a player has to be on the AHL roster at the trade deadline in order to be eligible for the AHL playoffs, and then you have to use one of your recalls to bring them back up. It's an absolutely moronic rule. I don't understand the benefit of this rule, but it's the reality, and the Canadiens are gonna have to manage that. You know, like, is Arber Xhekaj going to spend the rest of the season in Laval? I don't see any momentum to him getting called up right now. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's.
Well, that's another benefit. You see, that's another benefit of playing Guhly on the right side, because Barron is still waiver exempt, so they could decide to send him down for a bit so that they can call up Xhekaj.
Yeah, they could. But then who comes out on the left? It doesn't solve the it doesn't solve the issue. It doesn't solve the logjam on the left. So anyhow, it's just, we'll get into this when it's more appropriate time in the season, but it's just looking down the road. It's going to be interesting to see how they manage who's going to be playing in Laval, who's going to be on the roster in Laval on March 8th. So who basically they want, and to what extent they're going to bring guys up when you want Laval to be playing meaningful games down the stretch and trying to get into the playoffs. So it's that's going to be an interesting thing to me. And Joshua Roy falls right into that category in the sense that he's a guy that's going to help them make the playoffs. Yes, exactly. And as we both agree, that should be a higher priority for the Canadiens than whatever's going on in Montreal.
Mm-hmm. So for the time being, they're Laval, as we speak, at the time of this recording, they're playing for 514, one game above 500. They're fifth in the North Division, so they're really in a fight to the death with Utica and Toronto to win a playoff spot or to miss the playoffs altogether. So it's going to be a tough ask, but they're 8-1-1 in the last 10 games, so they've got some momentum.
All right. Let's get to Future Friday. We still don't have a jingle for Future Friday, but it is Friday. I don't know if you guys, obviously last week we talked about David Reinbacher. My story on him came out this morning on The Athletic.
I'm sure that nobody in the comments has mentioned Matvei Mishkov. I'm sure.
I literally have not read the comments for that very reason, and I mean, if there probably is, and what have you. And that's the unfortunate thing about his reality is that he's always going to be tied to this guy who's like almost a mythical figure. He's become greater than himself. He's like this. He's an ideology.
Yeah.
Matvei Michkov is an ideology. He represents something that Canadiens fans have not had for so long and want so badly. Just an offensive superstar potential. And he definitely has that, 100%. But it's the Canadiens decide to go another direction. And the guy they picked is a pretty darn good hockey player and plays a very rare position, which is it's a coveted position. A mobile, big, physical, puck moving right shot defenseman. It's valuable. So anyhow, we talked about Reinbacher last week. I mean, I don't have that much to add. You can read the story, but it's I think it was crazy how much Mark Streit was just like kind of gaga over this guy. Really, really, and I guess one of the revelations in the story, if you go read it, is that he was one of the people, Vincent Lecavalier, who played with Mark Streit in Philadelphia. This was one of the calls that the Canadiens made, was they wanted Mark Streit's endorsement of this kid, and they got it full on before they drafted him. So, but while I was in Zurich, or in Switzerland generally, but specifically Zurich, I also had a chance to meet with Vinzenz Rohrer, who, the third round pick out of the Ottawa 67s. He was the kid who we successfully predicted the Canadiens were going to draft somehow magically, based on
the combine.
Nick Bobrov's combine behavior when he was getting measured.
Did you tell that story before? In our old podcast, you did, but it's worth it.
We wrote about it. Yeah, I mean, so basically, we were at the combine. It's kind of our combine notebook. But one day, I don't know why, I was kind of standing on the rail talking to someone, and I noticed Bobrov sprinting down the stairs. And one thing I knew was that Bobrov was very skeptical of the NHL Combine's measurements. Because of the way that Joachim Kemmel got measured in, and you remember he was measured in much shorter than people thought he was. And I was told that Bobrov was very skeptical of that measurement, so then he became skeptical of all the measurements.
Well, and with good reason. I mean, Owen Pickering told us that he managed to get measured with his cell phone in his pocket,
with his cell phone in his pocket.
It could add a few hundred grams to his total weight.
Exactly. So anyhow, I'm against. I forget. I think I was maybe talking to Corey Pronman. I don't remember, but he went sprinting down, so I went to go check who was getting measured, and it was Vinzenz Rohrer. And just to give a shout out to Corey Pronman, this is how good he is. As soon as I saw that it was Vinzenz Rohrer, I walked straight to Corey and I said, "Corey, what can you tell me about Vinzenz Rohrer?" And he just gave me like this bio of him, like quickly, this, he's good at this, he's not good at this, like 3rd round pick. Like he's like it's encyclopedia. So anyhow, so we kind of wrote in the notebook, if the Canadians call Vinzenz Rohrer's name at the draft, then you heard it here first. And turns out they did draft him. So anyhow, that was a feather in our cap for a bit. But he's kind of an interesting story, and I think it's actually something that maybe more NHL teams should look into doing. Under normal circumstances, as a CHL player, I believe the Canadians have to sign him at the end of this season? They have 2 years, right? For a CHL player?
CHL players, they got 2 years. Yeah. And if you play...
So under normal circumstances, if Vinzenz Rohrer had stayed in the OHL, stayed with the Ottawa 67s, they would have to make a decision on him at the end of this season. Because he went to Zurich, he signed a 2-year contract with Zurich. They can now wait until after that contract is up. So they've bought themselves an extra year of development, which is smart thing number 1. Smart thing number 2.
Okay, before we get to that smart thing number 2, let's stick to smart thing number 1. Was this a decision by the team or him who said, you know what, I'd rather go back to Switzerland?
You know what? No, it was both. What happened was Zurich targeted him as a guy that they could get, that could help them. Because Zurich's the best team in the National League in Switzerland. They're also probably the wealthiest team in the National League. They're the only team that has its own U20 team. They're a very development-heavy organization. And Mark Crawford's the coach there. I had a long conversation with him, and he really firmly believes in developing their own talent. And most of the teams in that league don't do that. They have older teams, young guys. It's very hard for young guys to get into the lineup. Rohrer's been a pretty consistent presence in Crawford's lineup, and they're the best team in the league. So yeah, to your point.
So it was a common decision.
It was a mutual decision.
Yeah.
So like Crawford said that they targeted Rohrer because he would not be an import necessarily, because in the same sense that Reinbacher's not an import, I believe Rohrer's not an import either. I could be wrong on that actually. Maybe
that's true. Austrians are not considered imports in Switzerland.
So he's not an import. He's obviously a high skill guy. I mean, he's one of the few NHL drafted players in the league. I mean, other than guys who already played in the NHL, obviously, but guys who have yet to play in the NHL, there's not many drafted players in that league. So the Zurich reached out to the Canadians, explained their program. Their facilities are basically NHL level. I mean, you know what? Their facilities are very similar to what Laval has.
Okay.
So a very, compared to Cloten, very nice facilities, like very, very nice. And he has a strength and conditioning coach there who's been working with him consistently. And this is the thing that struck me, and I will write about this probably next week. the dedication he has to put on muscle and build himself into the NHL version of himself has blown Mark Crawford away, has blown his strength coach over there away. And the other benefit of this, other than getting the extra year of development, is that he's basically going to Switzerland and gets to play an NCAA style schedule where generally sometimes you play on Tuesday, but generally you play Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Sunday. And you sleep in your bed every night. And
you don't go to school compared to NCAA. So if you want to spend a lot of time at the gym, you can.
Well, he's spending lots of time in the gym, and this is what has blown them away about him. So on the ice, he's getting there. It's tough. It's tough as a young player in that league. It's difficult, and so, but he's helping them. Crawford said he tries to get him power play time. But basically he kind of needs injuries in order to get that power play time, but he's getting regular minutes. He's playing a regular shift, and he's putting in a ton of work in the gym. And, Crawford's convinced. Like, Crawford thinks at the end of his 2-year contract, so this is year 1, at the end of that, he said that probably need a year in Laval, and then he's going to be a really solid. He compared him to, he compared his ceiling to be like a David Perron type player in the NHL. So
that's a high ceiling.
That's a high ceiling, yeah, but it's that grit in his game that Crawford really likes, and that Crawford thinks is going to be transferable to the NHL. And so yes, he has a lot of skill, but that grit and that determination that has really blown him away. Like he couldn't stop talking about how determined this kid is. So we'll see. A 3rd round pick, nothing's guaranteed, but this seems to be kind of a loophole in the whole process, all the rules governing CHL players. Now, this would obviously only apply to like European players. Like, I don't know to what extent you could do this with everyone, but it's an interesting little loophole that they found, and I think it's been beneficial for Rohrer on a personal level. He's closer to home. He seems very happy there. On a professional level, he's getting everything he needs professionally from a very well-run organization, a professional organization, obviously, and playing against high-quality competition. And so I think probably improves his path to the NHL, like better than it probably would have had he stayed in the CHL and then played next season in Laval. I think having the 2 years in Zurich with the time he gets to work on his body and then come to Laval probably is going to be better for him. We'll see what happens. I don't think anything. He's not a surefire, no doubter NHL, but Mark Crawford.
No, and especially with the body that he's got, he needs a lot of runway to develop and fully mature.
I'll tell you what, man. I sat with him for 20 minutes, and he already looks much different than he did at development camp.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's noticeable. He's thicker than he was, and I'm not going to get into. I actually haven't gone through the tape yet with his strength and conditioning coach, but he started throwing out a whole bunch of initials and terms that I didn't understand. I had to stop and like, okay, what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean? And he's just like, but basically all the metrics that they use, all the evaluation, and the one thing that was actually really interesting is that his training, like they're measuring the tools you need to win battles and applying them into their training methods. It was actually a really interesting conversation. And so when you read the story, you'll get more of it because it's, I need to jog my memory, but
sure.
He basically, they measure what you exert in battle situations in practice, and they try to gear their workout routines to help improve that performance.
Okay.
Basically, they have training regimens meant to improve your ability to win board battles. I thought it was super interesting. Anyhow,
in Switzerland. That's interesting.
In Switzerland. Absolutely.
That's interesting because it would be one thing to do that in Laval, but to do that in Switzerland, to develop your physical strategy based on one-on-one battles, that's good.
Well,
At least
this speaks to the sincerity of Zurich's motives here. They know that Rohrer has to improve in that area of the game in order to one day make the NHL, and so they're working on it. I don't. He doesn't need it as much in the Swiss. There are board battles in the Swiss league. I mean, it's or in the National League, I should say, in Switzerland. It's not as physical as the NHL, but there are board battles, and you are entering them against grown men, usually in their late 20s, early 30s. But yeah, it was super interesting conversations, both with him. He's a fascinating guy to talk to. He's really well spoken. Super confident and just like
diverse interests.
You could see how he would kill the combine interview. Walking into a team suite, he would be the guy. Like he would leave all those scouts like, whoa, look at that kid. That kid's impressive. I mean, that's how he left me. It's like 20 minutes after speaking. Like he's just a really intelligent, reasonable, a thoughtful kid, and so so let's see. We'll see what comes of it. But I think from what I saw, I think the move to Zurich is probably going to be a positive for him. That's
good. Something that Philip Michard would have been eligible for that, I guess. Or
I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, it's
different path, but it's
a different path, and he would have, he wouldn't go play in Slovakia. Because the league's not that good. So, I think there was some thought of him going to Sweden at some point, which he could have done. I don't know what the import rule is in Sweden or if they even have one. But
in any case, he's been doing just fine in Kitchener.
I think the Rangers is working out just fine for him. So, but in any case, it is something, it's an interesting tactic, let's say, that maybe they could use with CHL players in the future. And I don't know to what extent you could do it with a Canadian or whatever, but it's working out in this. Maybe this is a one-shot deal. Maybe this was just the perfect circumstance to do it in. But in any case, the Canadians wind up with an extra year to evaluate him. He winds up with an extra year to work on everything he needs to work on. And maybe at the end of the process, the Canadians get a really nice, polished middle six forward out of it.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, he's 5'11", so he's not the smallest guy, but I remember my memory of him as being a tiny guy. But at some point, that you got some body frames that can add some more muscle and really develop. I remember KK when he arrived, he was so thin, and now in his Carolina Hurricanes days, he's become a man.
He's a bigger guy, but it's on the slim side or lean, let's say. But he's definitely filled out his frame, which we all knew he would, And so, I mean, in Rohrer's case, it's less obvious. Like even on draft day for Kotkaniemi, you saw the frame was there. There's nothing on it, so you could see that that's a frame that you could build on. Rohrer did not look like he had that frame to build on, and he's building on it. Honestly, like his strength coaches, first of all, he's a specimen of a man. The strength coaches, and he is just honestly, he's blown away by the improvements he's made just in the short time he's been there since, I guess, August when he started working with them. So late August or so.
Okay,
hasn't been a very long time. So he's doing
I'll get used to naming him or saying his name more often. But Rohrer, right now, doesn't roll off the tongue very easily. It reminds me of that. It reminds me of that. Yeah, exactly. Reminds me of that old SNL skit. No, it was actually in 30 Rock, where they talk about this show called The Rural Juror. The Rural Juror. So, anyway. All right. Hey, man, I got to go. So, and our listeners too, and you too. So let's go. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back on Monday. So Canadians are playing in Boston on Saturday night. And we'll be back with our Monday mailbag. So, hey, send us your questions. You can do so on our, through email. But you can just write us at basuandgodin@gmail.com. or through our Twitter handle, which is simply Basu and Godin. And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, well, why don't you stop and give us a little comment, a little 5-star rating? That always helps. And voila. That's it.
Have a nice weekend, everyone, and we will talk to you on Monday.